Welcome to 23 Degrees Sideways. I've been doing a couple of takes trying to get this video down right, and fortunately the sun's up a little more. It's about 20 degrees over the horizon, but it's still very dark today, and that's because we have a lot of alkali dust. About half the streetlights are still on. It's really dim. It's really dusty. We have an insane amount of alkali dust out here, which is like just air pollution. Now, it's not man-made air pollution, mostly. It's an agricultural valley, so you never know. Farming in the desert. But for the most part, this is just the way the alkali deserts are. But it brings the topic of pollution up in my mind, and pollution is the bastard stepchild of environmentalism. Now, we talk about global warming. Global warming is a package. It's a package surrounding a set of political ideologies, and they tend to be anti-individualist, anti-humane. They're not pro-human. They're not pro-human, certainly in the context of you and me, even if they are pro-power group. Like, they might be in favor of the humanity of a power group. But for you and me, it's not, okay? This is one of the problems with the global warming package. And it tends to ignore pollution in favor of emissions. And you might think that's not such a big difference, but let's really think about it. For example, when it comes to automobile tires, 35% of the weight of your tire ends up in your lungs over the lifetime of the tire. Not directly in your lungs. You know, it settles, it goes wherever, but like a third of your tire becomes tire dust in the air, and you breathe it. That's not good. If you live near a freeway, all the total emissions, the total pollutions from automobiles, if you live near a freeway, is such that you have like a 9,000% increase in COPD or asthma or whatever. Like, you have a breathing problem if you live within 500 feet of a freeway. Period. Dot. End of story. That's pretty bad. But when the global warming people talk, they don't talk about that. This isn't the topic. Human effects are no longer the topic. I grew up in an era when pollution was about human effects as well as environmental effects. We don't talk about that as much anymore. Which is funny because we have this major health crisis that results from all of these artificial inputs. But a lot of those artificial inputs drive the power that the people promoting the global warming emissions control stuff rely on, so they'd be shooting themselves in the foot to talk about pollution. We talk about emissions as if emissions are far removed from you. Emissions aren't about you. They're about a factory in China, which we accurately report has lowered its emissions because the Chinese government says so. Sure, right, I believe that. Pollution is one of the top environmental problems. If you want to be a humanocentric environmentalist, you need to tackle pollution. Manufacturing and the consumerist society is one of the biggest areas where we can have a huge impact. And it's very simple. Don't throw anything away. Now, I'm not advocating that you be a hoarder, because that would be silly. That's not going to help you in your quality of life at all. But maybe you should buy things that don't get thrown away. Maybe the paper cup isn't such a good idea. Of course, as I film this, we're in the middle of the coronavirus pandemic, and you're not allowed to reuse a cup no matter what, anywhere, because it's better to have random strangers touching 5,000 paper cups every day than to wash a cup. I'm not sure that makes sense, but that's what the health department says is healthier. More trash. And if you do have to use a paper cup, please just burn it, okay? Don't put it in a landfill. Those things are nasty. But less disposable, less throwing away, not buying things that are disposable. That's a pretty big deal. That's a huge, and that's a very personal deal. Okay, there's ups and downs to that psychologically, because if you become attached to something that's not disposable, it's not just a tool anymore, it's not just a thing, it becomes like mythologized and iconified, and you got to watch that, but that's a totally different topic. And we don't have to really worry about that with this video. But less disposability. Stop throwing things away by stopping yourself from buying things that get thrown away. That's important. And I think that we could incentivize that. Just like we could incentivize lower pollution with automobiles by, say, changing the licensing and registration requirements on smaller vehicles. How many of you would skip a trip to the DMV? How many of you would drive a smaller vehicle if it meant skipping trips to the DMV ever again? Like, I would drive like a little Seat 400. Americans don't even know. I would drive one of those little clown cars, or a trike. A motorcycle that's set up as a trike. Whatever, as a permanent, like, my vehicle. Get rid of everything but the farm truck, if I could avoid ever having to go to the DMV. The farm truck for me is necessary because I'm never going to get 14 bales of hay on a trike, or a Fiat 500, or whatever. But think about that. Lower emissions, much lower emissions, especially if you've got that much less weight wear on the tires, the engine, the whole... I've got a scooter at the house, and it's a motorcycle. We call it a scooter, but it's a full-fledged 250, and it gets 80 miles to the gallon. 80 miles to the gallon. And people talk about hybrid motorcycles. I'm like, why? 80 miles to the gallon. I'm good, right? And the tires last forever. So think this through a little bit. We could incentivize a type of environmentalism that promotes at least reducing the pollution without major changes to your lifestyle if we did things a little creatively. Eliminating DMV trips would encourage a lot of people to use smaller vehicles. I don't know how to get rid of the paper cups. I don't know how that one works. We've made the disposable consumerism such a big deal that I think you end up having to engage in some social engineering experiments to fix that. You need people to want quality, but one quality. Right now, when it comes to the higher end things, like in the prepper world, with the bushcraft people and stuff, people like a high-end knife and a high-end flashlight and high-end tools, fire starters, but they don't get one. I mean, one is none, right? Two is one, but they don't get two. They get 10. They get 15. There's no savings in terms of pollution inputs or pollution outputs in terms of manufacturing when you make something durable and then people obsessively collect it. That doesn't really help. And if it seems like I'm going a little rambly on here, it's because we're trying to come up with ideas. I'm trying to explore ideas and concepts. How do you reduce pollution? Pollution is the big deal. Pollution is the bastard stepchild, and people don't like to think about it. People don't think about it. Pollution, glass is the least polluting, most stable food and drink storage material we have on the planet. It's harder to transport, it's heavier, it requires 1/8 of the energy of recycling aluminum. It's infinitely recyclable. If you decide you don't want it, you break it up and you throw it in the ocean, and it becomes sand again because it's glass, it's sand. This is really easy. You can actually use strictly solar inputs to direct solar inputs to actually make it, although not on an industrial scale, but it's a hobby thing. Glass is awesome, but we don't use it. And this is an area where if you want a government policy to encourage environmentalism, and I feel like we need to have some sort of social governmental policy, because you can't leave it to the corporate marketplace. The corporate marketplace is really kind of fucked up when it comes to pollution. If you're going to have any kind of government policy or social policy in place, that's where you start, is promote reusable, low impact, low energy things like glass. Just get the glass back on the shelves. Oh, the number of plastic containers that used to be glass. You know, people advertise it as convenient. Oh, conveniently, your pickles are no longer in a glass jar, they're in plastic. Because I really want high acid foods in plastic. Ugh. No, I really don't. But also, I can't do anything with that plastic. Glass jars are infinitely reusable, even if you don't recycle them. Like, you can put stuff in them. You can use them for canning. It used to be that pretty much every jar you got at a store had a standard lid. That was actually a selling point for a long time with a lot of jarred spaghetti sauces and stuff, was that you had a standard lid and people would collect those because you used them for canning, because people did things for themselves once upon a time. And canning was part of that. And I'm not saying everybody canned, but, you know, if 20% of the population cans, then that changes the whole industry for glass jars. Even if 10% of the people can. So, glass, wood, you know, get away from the manufactured pseudo woods and get back to real wood. Wood is, at its core, a piece of the environment. It's biomass. At the very least, if you take a wood that hasn't been treated with arsenic or something, and it goes bad, you can literally put it in a pile, put it under some dirt, and let it rot and turn back into soil. You know, there's something there. There's something to it. It has a life cycle that goes back, basically back to its starting point. It's really oversimplified to say that it turns back into dirt, soil, but it's pretty accurate. And if you need to, you burn it. And that's fine, because you grow more trees. Like, the whole thing balances out. Speaking of trees and pollution and psychology, go plant some. Please advocate for everyone around you planting some. I'll get into the tree videos soon, but I feel like it's the biggest single terraforming project that we could do, is get our cities full of trees, get our parking lots and streets actually shaded. The amount of excess heat generated by a city passively because of a lack of trees is insane. I've talked enough. I think I've made the point in a very roundabout way. Pollution is the bastard stepchild of the environmental movement, and I think it's time to bring it back to the front, okay? Tires, glass, whatever your hobby horse is, take a look. Think about pollution from a humanocentric point of view. Stay sideways.